He was dating a new woman.
It had only been going on for a few months.
They've been just enjoying each other's company.
But their time together would be cut tragically short.
Police, mercy.
There were 2 wounds, pumping blood like a fire hydrant.
The trauma of witnessing the person that you went to bed next to happy, dying before your eyes. It is almost inconceivable.
Who had targeted this man and why?
You're thinking it's a domestic.
That attack was very personal, very up close.
There was the element of the love triangle.
The evidence is overwhelming.
There are surveillance cameras everywhere.
The footage was so good that you could see distinguishing factors.
But while identifying the killer seems easy, arresting him won't be.
At this point, he's desperate.
This guy willing to shoot police officers.
That's a whole nother ballgame.
Come out now!
That's when gunshots get fired.
This guy is clearly unhinged.
September 7th, 2020. It's Monday evening in Shreveport, Louisiana, a city of nearly 200,000 known for its diverse outdoor recreation.
We have wonderful natural resources. If you're an outdoorsman, a hunter, or a fisherman, or a hiker.
A lot of people come as far away from places like Oklahoma just to experience the sportsman paradise.
But this paradise isn't perfect.
Hello, Shreveport Police.
Just before 7 p.m., Shreveport police receive a 911 call from the city's Queensboro neighborhood.
It's an area that has, for decades, been the center of narcotics and crime.
What's that? Me and my boyfriend was in here sleeping, and all I know is somebody came to the door and started me to say.
The caller identifies herself as 30-year-old Bodecia Grant and says her boyfriend is 46-year-old Derek Taylor. But when asked for more information, she breaks down.
I can't understand the answer, okay? I need you to try to...
Man,
okay, man, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to understand it, but I can't. I know you understand. I do. I need the answer. Man.
That's when Bodecia hands the phone to a neighbor she'd run into in the parking lot.
The neighbor is able to give 911 the address of the apartment so they can send help.
But will they be able to get there in time?
The boyfriend that was Sam, be okay?
I don't know. I haven't been up there. I might be bleeding out or something.
Derek Taylor had only been dating Bodecia Grant for the past 2 months.
They've been spending a lot of time together, just enjoying each other's company.
And that was exactly what Bodecia needed after she'd recently ended things with her long-term boyfriend, Courtney Taylor.
The 2 of them were in a relationship for about 5 years. He fathered 2 children with her.
But their budding family and their relationship had fallen apart.
They had their children taken away from them, which I believe it had something to do with them splitting up.
And once she met Derek, Bodecia began putting her life back together.
Courtney and Derek, they weren't related.
Derek was also older and more stable than Courtney had been.
I had actually known Derek Taylor. I had arrested him when I was younger in the department. Nothing crazy, just like traffic stuff, but it seemed like he had started to settle down.
And while Derek and Bodecia had only been together a couple months, it appeared that things were going well.
Derek had essentially moved in with her.
But now, Bodecia and Derek may never get to see where their relationship could go.
Miss Grant makes a 911 call, advises that her boyfriend is stabbed.
Boadicia was so distraught during the call that she had to hand her phone over to the neighbor, who told the police their location.
All right, I'm getting officers and the medical unit out that way.
When first responders enter the apartment moments later, they find Derek on the floor.
It was obvious of why she was upset. It was a bloody scene.
You can see the stab wound. It's in a bad location.
He has been stabbed in the arm and in the chest.
Working quickly, the first responders drag Derek into the living room to render first aid.
While it disturbed the crime scene, they needed room to work.
That's an obvious chest wound.
Yeah. Their deal is to stabilize, get him on a stretcher, get him to the hospital, and try to save his life.
As the ambulance rushes Derek to the hospital, the responding officer attempts to get a statement from Boadicia.
Oh, God!
All right, I need you to tell me what happened, okay?
I can't believe it!
She's obviously very emotional, but manages to sketch out the basics of what happened.
She said she had worked till 4 or 5 p.m. and returned home. Derek Taylor was already there. She was tired from work and went to lay down. He joined her in the bedroom.
I must have done something.
The next thing she knew, she woke to see Derek jumping out of bed.
He was struggling, stating he had been hit.
She described his wound as pumping blood like a fire hydrant.
Confused and afraid, she followed Derek as he stumbled out into the hallway.
He collapses on the floor.
And according to Boadicia, that's when she ran for help.
I knew I had to get him help as soon as possible.
Because of how upset and emotional Miss Grant was, she was placed in a patrol car and officers were trying to settle her down.
But luckily for the police, someone else is able to talk.
Okay, so tell me what you saw.
The neighbor has crucial information for the investigation.
I think I saw the guy.
"46-year-old Derek Taylor had embarked on a brand new relationship with Boadicia Grant.
It had only been going on for a few months.
Boadicia had been on the rebound from her breakup with her ex, Courtney Taylor.
They had kids together, and prior to this particular incident, the kids were removed from them.
After meeting Derek, Boadicia had been slowly putting her life back together. But now it looks like tragedy has struck again.
Boadicia called 911 and reported that someone had come in and stabbed Derek.
Police officers and medical personnel from our fire department respond and find Derek Taylor laying in the hallway of the residence outside the bedroom.
EMTs waste little time getting Derek to the hospital.
They do their job well, and I've seen it happen to where you just don't think they're going to survive, and they survive.
All right, so tell me what happened, okay?
In the meantime, the responding officer tries to sort out what happened.
Although she's overcome with emotion, Boadicia is able to tell the police what little she knows.
I must have done something.
Miss Grant gave the account that they were sleeping in bed and she didn't know what happened.
She says she woke up to find Derek yelling and bleeding heavily from his chest.
Come over here with me.
It's not much to work with, but fortunately for the police, they have another eyewitness.
Their neighbor happened to be outside just working on his car.
So you're the neighbor?
And at a little before 7 p.m., he noticed someone coming out of Boadicia's building.
You think it's a suspect?
Had to be.
He was moving rapidly when he came back around the corner to get into his car. And that was one of the things that drew his attention to him.
He also said that the man was holding the front of his pants. like he had something stuffed in his waistband.
Had something in his pants. So I thought it was a little weird.
Then a few minutes later, Boadicia came out of the building hysterical.
When she started screaming that her boyfriend had been stabbed, the neighbor made the connection.
When the detectives arrive, they have Boadicia and the neighbor driven to the station for formal interviews.
We wanted to be able to speak to them away from the scene, away from any other chaos or distraction.
But first, they examine the crime scene.
You walk in the front door and you see this blood trail just being smeared across the floor.
The blood leads from the hallway into the apartment's living room.
Well, I was told the fire department had to move him into a bigger area.
And that is where the smear came in.
But it's clear that the bedroom was where the stabbing had occurred.
Blood is all over the side of the bed, to the wall, on the floor, along the baseboards, and on the door to the room.
That crime scene was brutal. That was a brutal stab wound.
The scene appears to fit what Boadicia told both the 911 dispatcher and the responding officer.
The blood spatter and transfer patterns suggest Derek was stabbed in the bed and staggered out of the room before collapsing in the hallway.
And there's no sign of the weapon used in the assault.
Which appears to fit what Boadicia's neighbor said about the subject having something hidden in his pants.
However, there are some things about the scene that have the detectives scratching their heads.
There was no damage to the apartment doorway.
It doesn't appear like there's a struggle.
And Boadicia's story about them being asleep seems a little suspicious.
It seems odd, 7 o'clock at night.
Who stabs somebody and you don't at least hear a struggle?
Your initial thoughts are, there's got to be more to this. The story doesn't make sense.
Unless it's a cover story.
You're thinking it's a domestic, that somehow Miss Grant is involved in what happened.
The nature of that attack, yeah, that was very personal, very up close, something that's very passionate.
Calling in on 911, it could be a ploy to misdirect you.
Although if that's the case, who was the man the neighbor saw fleeing the scene?
Either the neighbor is in on it somehow, or the detectives have misread the whole situation.
But before detectives can make their next move, they receive unfortunate news.
The victim had been declared deceased.
Now we're looking for a murder suspect.
Detectives investigating the mysterious stabbing that sent 46-year-old Derek Taylor to the hospital are now investigating a homicide.
The blade punctured one of his ventricles. It's a thing that pumps blood out of your heart.
On the scene, it was pretty much just an assault with a deadly weapon. But then, when this person has bled out, all of a sudden, this becomes a murder situation.
But who is the killer?
Given the nature of the crime, the detectives have yet to rule out a domestic incident or Derek's girlfriend, Boadicia Grant.
However, there's one complicating factor.
I think I saw the guy.
Boadicia's neighbor claims he saw someone fleeing the scene.
When the detectives return to the station and sit down with him for a formal statement, Boadicia's neighbor says he not only saw someone, he recognized them.
Yeah, I knew him. You knew him? Yeah, he was the old boyfriend.
They had been neighbors for 2 years.
So you saw his face?
Well, no.
Well, the man he saw was wearing a mask.
But you're sure it was him?
Yeah, for sure.
He had other distinguishing features. His hair, he had dreads.
If Boadicia's neighbor is telling the truth, It means the detective's first instinct was correct.
It's a domestic dispute after all.
There was the element of the love triangle.
All right, we appreciate you coming in today. That's all we need. You're free to go.
Hoping to learn more about her ex-boyfriend, the detectives turned to Boadicea.
By this point, she's had time to recover a little of her composure.
You hadn't been seeing Derek very long, had you?
Just 2 months?
And before that, you were dating somebody else?
Yeah, Courtney Taylor.
You're thinking Courtney Taylor and Derek Taylor. What is this relationship and this dynamic?
Are these brothers fighting over a woman or something?
But that's not the case.
Common names like Taylor, Smith, Williams, you're gonna have these families with the same name from the same area, but not related.
Okay, so you and Courtney broke up.
Yeah.
She said that their relationship had ended on a sour note, that they had kids and something happened and they lost their children.
Boadicea says that after the breakup, Courtney had moved on with a new girlfriend named Keandra Hines.
He's living with her in Mansfield now.
Mansfield is a small town. It's about roughly 30, 40 minutes outside of Shreveport.
However, despite his new relationship, it's possible Courtney had been angry that Boadicea was also seeing someone else.
Some people just can't let go of a relationship.
He may have been able to slip quietly into the apartment.
He did have a key at one time.
Hoping to confirm what Boadicea and her neighbor told them, the detectives returned to the scene of the crime.
In a situation where there's been a violent crime like this occur, canvassing the area is paramount because there could be security cameras, possible witnesses, and we start piecing different things together.
In this case, the detectives are in luck.
There are surveillance cameras everywhere.
And when the detectives return to the station to screen the footage from the complex's cameras, it proves crucial to the case.
It verified the accounts of the witnesses.
On the recording, a car pulls into the lot shortly before 7 p.m.
The footage was so good that you could see distinguishing factors about the vehicle.
You see the suspect exit the vehicle. There was still plenty of daylight out there for these cameras to pick up good quality video of this individual.
And while the suspect is wearing a mask, just as the neighbor said, it's easy to see why he didn't have much trouble recognizing him.
Physically, even without a mask, Courtney Taylor had very distinguishing physical features.
He has dreadlocks that were tied back.
He was very slender, and he was 6'2" or taller.
A second camera recorded him entering Boadicia's apartment.
So you see this possible suspect walk around the corner, walk up the stairs.
He did not pause hardly at all at the door. He just kind of turned the knob and went in.
Then, after a few brief moments, the man in the video is back outside.
19 seconds. That's how long it took him from whenever he went in and came out.
The assailant exits the apartment rapidly down the stairs, back around the corner of the building.
You can see while he's jogging, concealment of something before entering his vehicle.
The detectives believe it's the murder weapon.
The footage from the parking lot also shows exactly what Boadicia's neighbor said he saw that evening.
He was approximately 20 yards away.
The video clearly shows him turn and look at the assailant and then follow his car as it leaves the parking lot.
It's a tremendous piece of evidence for the detectives.
Surveillance systems have become paramount in having an eyewitness that really speaks for itself. And the video in this particular case really helped. That's when those small pieces start coming together.
Without that, the case probably would have centered around the 911 caller, Miss Grant.
But now, coupled with Boadicea and the neighbors' accounts of what happened, The surveillance video is more than enough for detectives to secure a warrant for Courtney Taylor's arrest.
But in order to arrest him, they have to find him first.
The detectives start by looking up the registration for the car Courtney had been driving.
When I ran the registration for the vehicle, it showed an address in a parish south of here.
And the name on the registration is Courtney's new girlfriend, Keandra.
Detectives reach out to the sheriff's office in DeSoto Parish, who send a patrol car to her residence.
We finally located the vehicle that we've been looking for.
It's parked right outside Keandra's house.
Car matches the description and license plate.
Sheriff's deputies in DeSoto Parish have just located the car believed to be driven by Courtney Taylor, the main person of interest in the murder of 46-year-old Derek Taylor.
We got a car with a matching description and license plate number.
Derek had been dating Courtney's ex, Bodesia Grant.
But the car was registered to Courtney's new girlfriend, Keandra.
And once they find out who that car belongs to, it's kind of like connecting the dots.
And now they've found Keandra's car parked right outside her house.
He saw the vehicle sitting there and contacted the residents.
The woman who comes to the door tells the deputy that Courtney and Keandra aren't there.
Is that their car over there?
Mr. Taylor had been there with his new girlfriend the previous evening, but they had left in another vehicle.
It's actually quite irritating when you get so close just to realize you're still so far away. So now we're having to look for a completely different vehicle and start that whole process all over again.
After talking to Keandra's relative,
Thank you so much for your time, man.
No problem.
the DeSoto Parish deputy has her car towed to impound.
The vehicle was believed to have been used by the suspect to flee the location in Shreveport.
Let's go ahead and get a tow. Over.
Detective McAtee worked with investigators in that jurisdiction to obtain a search warrant for the vehicle once it had been impounded.
Warrant in hand, the Shreveport detectives search Keandra's car.
DNA swabs are taken from the passenger side of the front. Also, there was a spot on the headliner that we thought may have been blood or blood transfer.
It turned out it wasn't blood.
And that's not the only disappointment.
There was no weapons found in the vehicle.
They processed the vehicle and did not find any relevant information pertaining to this case.
Therefore, the vehicle was released.
Although when the detectives contact Keandra by phone to tell her she can pick up her car, she seems cautious.
She was very guarded, just stated that she didn't understand why her vehicle had been taken.
Well, it was part of a murder investigation.
Really?
She was told that Courtney Taylor was wanted for murder of Derek Taylor at that point.
You don't know where he is, do you?
No.
In fact, she stonewalled detectives completely.
She wouldn't tell us where she was so that she could be interviewed.
If you do see Courtney, let him know we'd like to talk to him.
She now had my phone number. He could reach out and call me or come in for an interview.
Not that detectives have much hope of that happening.
I 100% felt that she was more worried about Mr. Courtney Taylor than the victim. And that was attacked and stabbed while asleep.
With Courtney apparently in the wind, detectives are even more certain he's their man.
It's like detectives always say, when you're guilty, the first thing you do is run.
And the fact that he is still at large is more than a little unsettling for Bodesia.
Living through what she just lived through, I can understand some amount of fear in her knowing that Courtney Taylor was still out there.
It is almost inconceivable what it must have been like to wake up to your partner gasping for breath, bleeding, trying to cling to life, the confusion, the trauma of witnessing the person that you went to bed next to happy, dying before your eyes.
I'm sure this entire time she was sitting on pins and needles wondering if Courtney was coming for her.
However, despite spending the next several months trying to locate Courtney, he manages to elude capture. Until, in early December, a tip comes in from Shreveport Crime Stoppers.
This tip identified an exact location where Courtney Taylor is supposed to be staying with his new girlfriend.
But is it too good to be true?
After we received the Crime Stoppers tip, I drive by and observe the sedan that I have previously impounded and released.
It's the same car that Courtney had been driving in the surveillance video.
With the tip looking credible, the Shreveport police call in the U.S. Marshals.
They're going to try to execute the arrest warrant for Courtney Taylor at this residence.
U.S. Marshals, open up!
A woman answers the door, but it's not Keandra.
Looking for a Courtney Taylor.
Who? I don't know any Courtney Taylor.
But immediately after that, the woman nods her head towards the back of the house.
She was alerting them with her body that he was in fact there.
She just doesn't want Courtney to hear her.
After moving the woman to safety, the SWAT team storms inside.
Clear.
Clearing the house, there's no sign of the suspect.
Clear.
Until they come to a closed bedroom door.
U.S. Marshals, come out now!
As the officers are about to step into the room, shots are fired from the other side of that door.
U.S. Marshals believe they've finally cornered murder suspect Courtney Taylor.
A Crime Stoppers tip led law enforcement to his hideout.
U.S. Marshals, come out now!
But just as they're closing in, the situation escalates.
Shots are fired from the other side of that bedroom door.
The police and marshals duck for cover.
Fortunately, no one was struck by the rounds that came through the door.
But in the confusion, Courtney climbs out a window and escapes through the backyard.
As normal procedure, they had positioned some officers in the back of the house. But when those shots rang out, those officers came forward to assist and make sure there wasn't anybody injured. Well, that allowed the suspect to escape.
He fired the rounds so he could get out of the house. He shot through the door to slow us down.
But his desperate move only makes the police more determined to find him.
The fact that this guy's willing to shoot at a law enforcement officer, it amps it up. We got to get this guy. It's all hands on deck.
And for at least some of the detectives searching for him, finding Courtney had become personal.
One of my best friends on earth was shot at because I sent him there. Ooh, that was a rough couple hours.
You know, law enforcement is a group of people that are loyal, that are going to go the distance for you.
Although for the moment, all detectives can do is search the house where Courtney had been hiding out.
They recovered the shell casings from inside the room where the suspect was, and they recovered the projectiles from the other room where the bullets passed through the door.
While the search for Courtney continues, the news of his harrowing escape puts the community on high alert.
There's somebody still actively out there that's willing to shoot at police, unwilling to shoot someone else to get away.
How can anyone feel safe?
But with Courtney's picture now all over the news, it isn't long before another lead comes in to the Crime Stoppers tip line.
Supposedly, Courtney is in an apartment across the river from Shreveport in Bossier City, Louisiana.
And when police arrive, there's no shootout with Courtney this time.
They were able to take him into custody without incident.
Keandra was with him and is also taken into custody.
She knew why he's being searched and looked for, and still saying, all right, I'm gonna help hide you. And at that point, she is just as much part of the problem as Mr. Taylor was.
Courtney's arrest is welcome news for Boadicea and all of Shreveport.
That had to be a relief for everyone. This guy committed a murder, and this guy needs to be in prison.
And in this case, the community needs to be thanked, because I don't know who those Crime Stopper tips were from. But whoever they were from knew enough and provided information that did result in somebody wanted for a brutal murder taken off the street.
Once in custody, Courtney refuses to talk.
Courtney stated that he was not going to speak to me, had nothing to say to me, and had no idea why he was under arrest for murder.
However, now facing accessory charges, Keandra is suddenly more cooperative. Although according to her, she'd had no choice.
She's claiming that she's afraid because he told me he would kill me.
I don't know if she was standing by her man or if she was afraid of her man. It could have been both.
We found a car in Mansfield, we impounded it. The car's then released, and then the car is found again in Shreveport where he is staying with her. And so after that, he evades the police. Then he's captured in Bossier, and she's with him again. I don't think that there was any control over her. She wanted to be there. She went along for this ride like Bonnie and Clyde.
However, there is one person that Courtney is trying to control, even from behind bars.
In May of 2021, Boadicea gets a phone call from Courtney, who is in jail awaiting trial.
In our local jails, inmates are allowed to make phone calls. All of those phone calls are recorded.
And from the recordings, it's clear that he's trying to sway her testimony.
You can't make you say that you don't know. I promise you that.
After evading authorities for 3 months, murder suspect Courtney Taylor is finally in custody.
The crime occurred early September, and he was arrested early December.
He was booked into Bossier Parish Jail, extradited back to Shreveport.
And prosecutors have an abundance of evidence against him.
The main items were the surveillance video and that eyewitness in the parking lot. And then Mr. Taylor's actions when police did corner him, and he shot it out with them and made a second escape. That showed his guilty conscience.
Still, the district attorney believes Courtney's ex-girlfriend, Boadicea Grant, will be essential.
She made the case. She was 75% of the evidence.
And it was obvious the prosecutors weren't the only ones who thought so.
On May 6, 2021, Courtney calls Boadicea from jail.
The call starts off on a seemingly friendly note.
I miss you.
Defendants do make these phone calls. They remind them of the good times, of the love that they shared, of the children that they shared. And all of this is trying to prevent witnesses from testifying.
I ain't did nothing. You heard me?
He was attempting to direct Miss Grant to testify that she didn't know what happened.
But in the process, Courtney ends up implicating himself.
What happened?
You was asleep.
How would he have known she was asleep if he had not been in the room?
When you're guilty, you do dumb things.
There's an automated thing on the line that says this call will be recorded, but for whatever reason, unbeknownst to me, criminals will spill the beans over the phone, and it's not uncommon where they're not directly saying they had involvement, but they're saying enough.
You heard what I said? You don't know you was asleep. You don't know what the hell going on. You hear me?
Despite the pressure, Boudicca refuses to budge.
You know, they subpoenaed me.
She needed the cover of our subpoena. That's a man she had a 5-year relationship with, the father of her children. To say that she no longer had feelings for him would be silly, right? But that court order emotionally helped her parse her role in this.
But as Courtney continues to push, Boudicca loses her patience.
You should never came there and messed with that man. I'm not gonna lie. I can't.
She was very forthright on the phone call. She basically told him she was going to show up and tell the truth.
When Courtney goes on trial in May of 2023, the prosecutors open their case by describing Derek's murder as an act of domestic violence.
A lot of people, when they hear domestic, they're used to hearing a male-on-female interaction, but that's not always the case. This is still a very domestic case in the sense of an ex-boyfriend stabbed and killed the new boyfriend.
Domestic violence, it's about control. They're going to go back and try to gain control one way or the other. And usually, they're going to gain that control through violence.
According to the prosecutor, that's exactly what Courtney was doing when he went to Boudicca's apartment on the evening of September 7th, 2020.
We can assume that he might have had bad intentions. Whether or not he knew he would find Derek Taylor there, I don't know. It might have just been a situation, as we say, wrong place, wrong time.
Regardless of whether he knew Derek was there or was surprised to find him in bed with Boudicca, Courtney struck silently and swiftly.
A knife doesn't make any noise, so if, in fact, the assailant had just stabbed and then immediately left, I don't doubt her statement that she didn't see the assailant as he left. He was familiar with the apartment. He could have moved silently, and he could have left quickly. And in fact, we see that on the surveillance video.
And while Courtney made his way back to his car, there was chaos inside Boudicca's apartment.
Waking up to getting stabbed, not knowing what's going on, I couldn't begin to imagine what Derek Taylor was thinking in those moments.
Baby, what's wrong? Hold on, wait.
It's unspeakable. I don't know how anybody could think to do that to someone.
When it's time for Boudicca's testimony, she doesn't back down.
When she testified, it was tense, but she did a good job. She testified truthfully. She spoke clearly. A lot of times people will just disappear and they'll talk so softly that the jury can't hear them. But she spoke out.
However, there was one thing she couldn't say.
She couldn't positively say that she saw Courtney stab Derek.
I don't think she was trying to avoid any responsibility. I think she probably did not actually see him.
When it's the defense's turn, Courtney's attorneys leap at the opening.
Counsel for the defense argued that there wasn't a quote-unquote witness to this event.
But when the jury reaches its verdict, it's clear that the prosecutors had made their case.
The jury found him guilty of second-degree murder.
Courtney's sentenced to life without parole.
This guy will spend the rest of his life in jail. You won't hurt anybody else. You won't have any more victims.
That does bring some sense of relief for the family and loved ones of Derek Taylor.
For her role, Keandra is convicted of accessory after the fact, but faces a much lighter punishment.
She was sentenced to just 2 years of supervised probation.
But even if Courtney is where he belongs, it can't make up for all he took from Derek's loved ones.
Here was a man whose life was snatched away from him for no reason other than he happened to fall in love with a woman who'd once been in a relationship with a madman.
And Derek probably never saw it coming.
From our investigation, Derek Taylor had no understanding that somebody out there wanted him dead.
There didn't appear to be any beef or any conflict between Derek Taylor and Courtney Taylor prior to this incident.
You never know in a relationship where the drama issue is going to come from.
The highway never remembers the names of the people who disappear upon it. It remembers only the tire marks that vanish beneath the next storm, the headlights swallowed by darkness, the endless roar of trucks carrying strangers toward places they may never reach. Thousands of travelers cross America's interstates every hour. Families, college students, truck drivers, couples chasing new beginnings. Most arrive exactly where they planned. Some never do. On the afternoon of August 23, 1992, 21-year-old Tammy Zawicki became one of those names the highway refused to give back. She wasn't running away. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't caught in the middle of a dangerous secret. She was simply trying to drive home. That simple journey would become one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a cold case that has stretched across decades, crossed multiple states, and left investigators asking the same impossible question over and over again. How does someone vanish from one of the busiest highways in the country without anyone seeing what happened? The question has echoed for more than 30 years. And despite thousands of leads, countless interviews, forensic examinations, and renewed investigations, no jury has ever heard the full story because no one has ever been charged with Tammy Zawicki's murder. The mystery begins hundreds of miles away from the lonely stretch of Interstate 80 where everything unraveled. Tammy was a college student at Grinnell College in Iowa. Friends described her as bright, dependable, and deeply committed to her education. She was the kind of student who planned ahead, who called home, who stayed connected with family. There was nothing mysterious about her life. No double identity. No hidden criminal connections. No dramatic conflicts waiting to explode. She was exactly who she appeared to be. A young woman working toward her future. As summer drew to a close, she prepared to leave campus and return to her family home in Illinois before the next semester began. The drive wasn't unusual. Thousands of students made similar trips every year. The route followed major interstate highways, roads filled with commuters, truckers, vacationers, and state police patrols. On paper, it should have been one of the safest drives imaginable. But highways create a dangerous illusion. They feel public. They feel visible. Yet every exit, every rest stop, every shoulder where a disabled vehicle waits becomes an isolated world for just a few moments. Sometimes those few moments are enough. Tammy left Grinnell in her white 1985 Pontiac T1000. It wasn't a new car. Like many college students, she drove an aging vehicle that had seen better days. Mechanical problems weren't unheard of. In fact, before long, they became impossible to ignore. Somewhere along Interstate 80, her car began experiencing trouble. Witnesses would later report seeing the Pontiac stopped on the shoulder. Its hood was reportedly open. Tammy appeared to be waiting for assistance. Nothing about that image seemed alarming. Drivers break down every day. People stop to help. Tow trucks arrive. Mechanics fix problems. Traffic continues moving. Life goes on. But investigators now believe those ordinary moments became the opening chapter of an extraordinary crime. The last confirmed sightings paint a picture both ordinary and terrifying. Tammy was reportedly seen speaking with individuals after experiencing mechanical issues. Several witnesses remembered seeing a young woman near her disabled car. Others recalled noticing large trucks in the area. The highway was busy. People noticed pieces of the scene. Almost no one realized they were watching the final known moments of a young woman's life. Then she disappeared. Not gradually. Not mysteriously over weeks or months. She was simply gone. When Tammy failed to arrive home, concern spread quickly. This wasn't someone who ignored her family. She maintained regular contact. If she were delayed, she would likely call. If the car broke down, she would find assistance. If plans changed, someone would know. But no phone call came. Hours became a day. A day became several. The silence grew heavier with every passing moment. Families often describe a particular instant when worry transforms into fear. Not panic. Not yet. Just the quiet realization that something is fundamentally wrong. Tammy's loved ones reached that moment quickly. Missing person reports triggered an expanding search. Law enforcement agencies across state lines began piecing together fragments of her journey. Where had she last been seen? Who spoke with her? Who stopped? Who kept driving? The answers were frustratingly incomplete. Highways are full of anonymous witnesses. Thousands of drivers pass through. Few remember faces. Even fewer remember license plates. By the time investigators retraced Tammy's route, countless potential witnesses had disappeared into the flow of interstate traffic forever. Then came the discovery that transformed a missing person investigation into a homicide. Her abandoned Pontiac was located along Interstate 80 near LaSalle County, Illinois. At first glance, it looked almost ordinary. There were no obvious signs of violent destruction. No shattered windows. No dramatic collision. No evidence suggesting a catastrophic accident. The vehicle had simply been left behind. Inside, investigators found personal belongings. Items Tammy almost certainly would not have willingly abandoned. To experienced investigators, abandoned personal property often speaks louder than broken glass. People fleeing danger grab essentials. Victims planning a new life pack valuables. College students returning home do not simply walk away from everything they own. The car became a silent witness. Every fingerprint. Every fiber. Every mechanical defect. Every object inside. Investigators processed it carefully, hoping the vehicle itself might reveal what Tammy no longer could. But vehicles don't always tell complete stories. Sometimes they preserve only questions. Forensic specialists examined the Pontiac for biological evidence. Investigators studied the mechanical problems. Could someone genuinely have stopped to help? Did the breakdown create an opportunity? Was the offender simply passing by? Or had someone been watching vulnerable motorists? Those questions would shape the investigation for decades. The timeline narrowed. Tammy likely encountered whoever took her shortly after experiencing car trouble. That realization terrified investigators because it suggested an offender capable of exploiting random opportunity. Not someone targeting Tammy personally. Someone targeting vulnerability itself. A broken-down vehicle. A young woman traveling alone. An isolated stretch of interstate. That combination has haunted criminal investigators for generations. Across America, countless violent crimes begin with mechanical failure. A flat tire. An overheated engine. An empty fuel tank. Small inconveniences becoming irreversible tragedies. As detectives expanded the search, another disturbing pattern emerged. Truck routes. Interstate corridors. Long-distance travel. The offender, if unknown to Tammy, could have been moving hundreds of miles in either direction before anyone realized a crime had occurred. Unlike crimes tied to neighborhoods, workplaces, or familiar communities, highway murders create enormous investigative challenges. Witnesses scatter across multiple states. Jurisdictions overlap. Evidence travels. Suspects disappear into the constant movement of interstate commerce. Every hour that passed widened the search area beyond imagination. Authorities issued alerts. Media coverage intensified. Flyers circulated. Tips poured in. Most led nowhere. Some consumed weeks of investigative work before collapsing under scrutiny. Yet detectives refused to stop. They interviewed truck drivers, service station employees, restaurant workers, tow truck operators, mechanics, travelers, anyone who might have crossed paths with Tammy during those final hours. The investigation became a puzzle with thousands of pieces but no picture on the box. Then, weeks after she vanished, the case took its darkest turn. Far from where her journey had begun, human remains were discovered in rural Missouri. The location was remote. Quiet. Far removed from the bustling interstate where Tammy's life had abruptly ended. Investigators soon confirmed what her family had feared. The remains belonged to Tammy Zwicky. Hope disappeared in a single identification. The search for a missing daughter became the search for a killer. The discovery also raised chilling new questions. Why transport the body such a great distance? Why choose such an isolated location? Was the offender familiar with the area? Or simply passing through? Every possibility pointed toward someone comfortable traveling long distances without attracting attention. The autopsy confirmed that Tammy had been the victim of homicide. Investigators withheld significant details from the public, a common strategy intended to protect information only the killer would know. Those unreleased facts became one of the investigation's most closely guarded assets. If someone confessed falsely, if attention seekers came forward, if future suspects emerged, detectives would possess facts capable of separating truth from fiction. But those facts also became part of the silence surrounding the case. The public knew a young woman had left college, experienced car trouble, vanished from one of America's busiest highways, and was later found murdered hundreds of miles away. Everything else remained hidden behind evidence files, laboratory reports, interview transcripts, and unanswered questions. Somewhere inside those files, investigators believed, was the detail that could finally expose the person responsible. They simply had not found the individual who could explain it. The realization spread through the investigative team with quiet brutality. This was no longer a missing person case built on hope. It was now a homicide investigation stretching across multiple states, bound together by a narrow timeline, a disabled college student's car, and a killer who had vanished into the endless flow of interstate traffic. Every passing day gave that unknown individual a greater advantage. Memories faded. Tire tracks disappeared beneath rain and new asphalt. Receipts were thrown away. Faces blurred together. America kept moving, while one family found itself trapped forever in the final days of August 1992. Detectives began reconstructing Tammy Sawicki's final journey minute by minute, mile by mile. They spread maps across conference tables, marked confirmed sightings with colored pins, and compared witness statements that often overlapped in frustratingly imperfect ways. One person remembered seeing a young woman standing beside a compact white car with its hood raised. Another remembered slowing briefly as traffic passed around the disabled vehicle. Someone else recalled a large tractor-trailer parked nearby but could not remember its color, its company logo, or even whether it had stopped to help or was simply parked along the shoulder. None of those observations seemed extraordinary when they happened. Only later did every ordinary detail become potentially critical. The stretch of Interstate 80 where Tammy experienced mechanical trouble was among the busiest transportation corridors in the United States. Tens of thousands of vehicles passed through every day. Commercial freight moved constantly between the Midwest and the East Coast. Truck drivers operated under demanding schedules, stopping briefly for fuel, meals, or mandatory rest before returning to the road. Investigators quickly recognized both the opportunity and the nightmare this created. Somewhere among thousands of passing motorists might have been the last person to see Tammy alive. Somewhere among those same thousands could also have been her killer. Finding one individual inside that moving river of traffic would prove almost impossible. Attention naturally turned toward the disabled Pontiac itself. Automotive experts examined the vehicle in detail, attempting to determine precisely what mechanical problem had stranded Tammy. Understanding why the car stopped mattered because it helped investigators estimate how long she remained exposed on the roadside before encountering whoever ultimately took her. The examination suggested the vehicle had indeed suffered legitimate mechanical difficulties. This was no staged breakdown. Tammy had not pulled over voluntarily to meet someone. She had encountered a genuine problem during an otherwise routine drive home. That finding strengthened one disturbing theory. The crime may have been entirely opportunistic. A predator traveling the interstate would not have needed advanced planning. He needed only patience, mobility, and the ability to recognize vulnerability when it appeared. A stranded motorist presented exactly that opportunity. A young woman traveling alone, far from home, facing an unexpected breakdown, might naturally accept assistance from someone who appeared confident, experienced, and helpful. It is one of the oldest psychological traps in criminal investigations. Danger rarely announces itself. It often arrives wearing the appearance of rescue. Investigators interviewed Tammy's friends, professors, classmates, neighbors, and relatives. They searched for hidden relationships, recent arguments, unexplained fears, financial troubles, or anyone who might have wished her harm. Nothing significant emerged. By every account, Tammy had been preparing for another semester of college. She maintained close ties with her family. Her future was filled with ordinary ambitions rather than dangerous entanglements. The absence of a personal motive forced detectives back toward the highway. Again and again, every investigative path returned to Interstate 80. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and experience with crimes crossing state boundaries. Analysts began reviewing reports of similar attacks occurring along interstate highways throughout the Midwest during the late 1980s and early 1990s. They searched for patterns involving stranded motorists, female victims, commercial truck routes, and offenders who appeared capable of disappearing before local authorities even realized a crime had occurred. Cold statistics painted a troubling picture. America's interstate highway system offered offenders something few other environments could provide: anonymity on an enormous scale. Unlike neighborhood crimes, highway offenses often left victims and offenders with no prior connection. Witnesses rarely knew either person. Surveillance cameras were limited. Cell phones had not yet become part of everyday life. Electronic toll records, GPS tracking, automatic license plate readers, and digital payment histories were still years away from becoming routine investigative tools. In 1992, a determined offender could cross several states leaving remarkably little trace. Every investigator understood this reality. It meant the killer might never have lived anywhere near Illinois, Iowa, or Missouri. He could have been from almost anywhere. As weeks turned into months, detectives released carefully selected information to the public. News broadcasts showed Tammy's smiling college photograph beside images of her abandoned Pontiac. Newspapers carried maps illustrating her final known route. Television reporters stood beside Interstate 80 describing the mystery that continued to deepen with every unanswered question. The response was immediate. Telephone lines filled with tips. Some callers believed they had seen Tammy talking to a truck driver. Others reported suspicious vehicles parked along highways weeks earlier. Several people insisted they knew exactly who committed the crime. Most of those leads collapsed under investigation. Memory is an unreliable witness. Public attention often creates accidental false recollections, honest mistakes shaped by repeated news coverage. Investigators spent countless hours separating genuine observations from assumptions formed after the fact. Still, every lead demanded attention. Even the weakest possibility had to be examined. Somewhere among hundreds of incorrect tips might be the single conversation capable of breaking the case open. The investigation also explored whether Tammy had accepted a ride after her vehicle became disabled. Friends described her as cautious, but circumstances matter. A young woman stranded hundreds of miles from home during a long drive might reasonably believe she had few options. Perhaps someone offered transportation to a nearby service station. Perhaps someone claimed to be a mechanic. Perhaps someone presented himself as another traveler simply trying to help. Predators often understand that trust develops quickly during moments of stress. They exploit urgency. They exploit politeness. Most of all, they exploit hope. Another possibility haunted investigators. What if Tammy never willingly entered another vehicle at all? Could she have been forced? Could the offender have displayed a weapon? Could the attack have happened so quickly that passing motorists noticed nothing unusual? Busy highways create a strange paradox. Thousands of people may be present. Yet almost no one truly sees. Drivers focus forward. They glance briefly toward the shoulder before accelerating past. A confrontation lasting only seconds can disappear behind the next curve before anyone recognizes its significance. Meanwhile, forensic scientists continued examining every available piece of physical evidence recovered from both the vehicle and the location where Tammy's body had been discovered. Laboratories searched for fingerprints, trace fibers, hairs, biological material, and microscopic evidence capable of identifying an unknown offender. Technology in the early 1990s offered investigators far fewer tools than modern forensic science. DNA analysis existed but remained limited compared with today's capabilities. Many laboratories faced significant backlogs. Samples considered too small or too degraded often produced no usable results. Evidence that might seem decisive decades later sometimes yielded little information at the time. Even so, detectives preserved everything. Every swab. Every photograph. Every fiber. Every document. Experienced investigators understood an important truth. Science evolves. Evidence kept today may answer tomorrow's questions. That decision would become increasingly important as the years passed. The case attracted national attention not only because of its brutality but because it represented a nightmare every family could imagine. Tammy had not disappeared while engaging in risky behavior. She had not entered an isolated wilderness or traveled through a dangerous neighborhood. She had simply driven home from college. Parents across America recognized themselves in her family. Students saw their own routine journeys reflected in hers. The randomness of the crime made it uniquely frightening. If it could happen to Tammy, people wondered, could it happen to anyone? Law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest distributed information about the investigation to truck stops, way stations, transportation companies, and commercial driver organizations. Detectives hoped someone in the trucking industry might recognize a description, remember an unusual conversation, or identify an individual whose behavior suddenly changed following August 1992. The commercial trucking community responded with cooperation. Drivers reported suspicious encounters. Dispatchers searched old records where possible. Companies reviewed employee histories. But the interstate remained enormous. Thousands of trucks traveled that corridor every week. Narrowing the search felt like looking for a single missing page inside an entire library. Months became years. The evidence room grew heavier with binders, photographs, interview transcripts, laboratory reports, and maps covered in handwritten notes. Detectives retired. New investigators inherited the files. Fresh eyes reviewed old evidence, challenging assumptions made years earlier. Every new investigator asked the same question. What did everyone else miss? Sometimes the answer lay in overlooked paperwork. Sometimes in forgotten witness interviews. Sometimes in advances in forensic science. Sometimes nowhere at all. Yet no serious investigator was willing to abandon Tammy's case. Cold cases possess an unusual gravity. They wait patiently. The victim never grows older. The photographs remain frozen. Only everyone searching for answers changes with time. Tammy's family refused to let the investigation disappear into forgotten archives. They continued speaking publicly, encouraging witnesses to come forward and reminding the country that behind every headline stood a daughter whose future had been stolen. Anniversaries arrived with painful regularity. Birthdays. Graduations that never happened. Family gatherings where one chair remained forever empty. For detectives, the case became more than an unsolved homicide. It became a promise. A promise that even if years passed, the search would continue. Because somewhere, someone still knew what happened beside that disabled Pontiac on Interstate 80. Someone had seen more than they realized. Someone had heard a conversation that seemed insignificant at the time. and somewhere beyond the stacks of evidence, beyond the fading memories and unanswered questions, the unknown killer continued living with the knowledge that one ordinary afternoon on an American highway had changed countless lives forever. The investigation refused to stand still, even when the trail seemed to have dissolved into the pavement of America's highways. Every few months, another detective reopened the folders, another analyst studied the photographs under brighter lights, another investigator traced Tammy Zawicki's final route with a finger moving slowly across the map, searching for the one detail everyone else had overlooked. Cold cases have a peculiar way of surviving. Unlike active investigations filled with daily arrests and fresh evidence, a cold case waits in silence. It gathers dust instead of headlines. Boxes replace crime scene tape. Witnesses grow older. Memories become uncertain. Yet somewhere beneath that silence, the unanswered questions remain exactly as sharp as they were on the day the victim disappeared. For Tammy's investigators, one question continued to dominate every discussion. Who was the last person to see her alive? Not the last confirmed witness. Not the last person who reported seeing the disabled Pontiac. The true final witness. The individual whose face Tammy saw moments before everything changed. Finding that person became the center of the investigation. Detectives returned repeatedly to truck stops scattered along Interstate 80. They walked through crowded parking lots where hundreds of tractor-trailers sat idling through the night. Chrome-reflected neon lights from nearby diners. Diesel engines rumbled endlessly beneath the glow of sodium street lamps. Drivers came and went carrying logbooks, coffee cups, and years of experience traveling America's highways. Many willingly spoke with investigators. They understood how vulnerable motorists could become after a breakdown. Most truck drivers spend their careers helping stranded travelers. A flat tire. An overheated radiator. A dead battery. Helping someone on the roadside was hardly unusual. That simple fact complicated everything. The killer, if he had stopped to offer assistance, would not necessarily have appeared suspicious. He could have looked exactly like every other Good Samaritan. Experienced. Confident. Helpful. Someone a frightened motorist might naturally trust. Investigators studied hundreds of interviews searching for even the smallest inconsistency. Did anyone remember an unusually nervous driver? Did someone leave a truck stop unexpectedly? Did anyone mention seeing a young woman entering a commercial vehicle? The answers remained frustratingly incomplete. Human memory is remarkably fragile. Ask someone to describe a stranger encountered for 30 seconds several weeks earlier, and certainty quickly dissolves into approximation. Now imagine asking that same question months later. Or years. The passage of time became one of the investigation's greatest enemies. Nevertheless, certain patterns slowly began attracting attention. Several witnesses recalled seeing Tammy after her vehicle experienced mechanical trouble. The descriptions differed in small details, but they generally supported the same sequence of events. Her Pontiac had broken down. She remained near the vehicle. She appeared to be waiting for assistance. After that, nothing. It was as though she had simply disappeared from the shoulder of Interstate 80. No one reported hearing screams. No reports described a violent struggle visible from passing traffic. No emergency calls flooded local dispatch centers. It was almost as if the offender understood exactly how to operate without drawing attention. That possibility deeply concerned investigators. Predators who succeed in remaining invisible often rely less on force than on control. They understand human behavior. They know people hesitate. They know victims often comply during the first moments of an encounter, believing cooperation may lead to safety. Whether Tammy willingly entered another vehicle under false pretenses or was forcibly abducted remains one of the central unanswered questions in the case. The available evidence has never allowed investigators to answer it with certainty. As the months passed, forensic laboratories continued processing preserved evidence using every available technique. Although DNA technology existed in the early 1990s, it was still developing rapidly. Samples that seemed insignificant today might become invaluable tomorrow. That understanding shaped every decision. Evidence was carefully stored rather than discarded. Clothing, trace materials, photographs, biological samples. Every item was preserved with extraordinary care. Veteran detectives had witnessed forensic science evolve throughout their careers. They knew impossible cases sometimes became solvable decades later because technology finally caught up with the evidence. While scientists examined physical evidence, criminal profilers focused on behavior. What kind of offender commits a crime like this? The victim appeared to have been selected because she was vulnerable rather than because she was personally known to the offender. That distinction mattered enormously. Targeted murders often reveal obvious motives. Financial disputes, domestic conflict, personal revenge. Random highway homicides rarely provide investigators with such advantages. Instead, they suggest an offender whose victims are strangers. Someone comfortable approaching unfamiliar people. Someone capable of appearing trustworthy long enough to lower their guard. Profilers considered whether the killer may have committed similar crimes before. If Tammy had been chosen opportunistically, perhaps she had not been the first. Perhaps she had not been the last. Investigators began comparing unsolved cases involving women who disappeared while traveling alone. Reports arrived from neighboring states. Missing person files surfaced from distant jurisdictions. Detectives exchanged information, searching for similarities that might connect seemingly unrelated investigations. Some comparisons appeared promising. Others collapsed after closer examination. Coincidences are common in criminal investigations. True connections are much rarer. Still, authorities refuse to dismiss any possibility too quickly. The interstate highway system links countless communities. An offender capable of traveling freely could leave victims hundreds of miles apart while remaining virtually invisible. As public interest continued, media coverage expanded beyond local newspapers. Television crime programs highlighted Tammy's case, reaching audiences far beyond the Midwest. Viewers across the country saw her smiling photograph and heard investigators describe the baffling disappearance that began with nothing more extraordinary than a disabled automobile. Each broadcast generated new telephone calls. Some callers sincerely believed they possessed useful information. Others confused Tammy's case with unrelated incidents. A few individuals falsely claimed responsibility, seeking attention rather than justice. False confessions are an unfortunate reality in major investigations. Some emerge from mental illness. Others from a desire for notoriety. Investigators approached every confession with cautious professionalism. Only someone truly involved would know certain details deliberately withheld from public release. Those protected facts became an invisible filter. Again and again, false confessions failed. Again and again, the investigation returned to where it had started. No verified suspect. No definitive eyewitness. No complete reconstruction of Tammy's final hours. Meanwhile, another challenge quietly emerged. Investigators themselves were changing. Retirements reshaped the case. Experienced detectives who had walked the original crime scenes handed boxes of evidence to younger officers who had been children, or not even born, when Tammy disappeared. Knowledge had to be transferred carefully. Every interview. Every theory. Every eliminated suspect. Every overlooked possibility. Nothing could be lost. Cold case work demands extraordinary discipline. One missing report. One mislabeled photograph. One forgotten interview. Any of them can delay justice for years. The new generation of investigators brought different strengths. They embraced advancing forensic science. They revisited timelines with modern analytical methods. They digitized aging paper records. Technology was changing not only how crimes were committed but also how they were investigated. Old evidence suddenly possessed new potential. DNA analysis became increasingly sophisticated through the late 1990s and early 2000s. Techniques requiring larger biological samples gradually gave way to methods capable of extracting information from far smaller traces. Cases once considered impossible quietly began reaching courtrooms across America. Every breakthrough offered renewed hope. Perhaps Tammy's case would be next. Evidence was submitted for additional testing whenever scientific advances justified another examination. Each round raised expectations. Each round also carried the possibility of disappointment. Sometimes laboratories identified partial profiles. Sometimes results excluded individuals previously considered interesting. Sometimes technology simply confirmed what investigators already knew without revealing the identity they desperately sought. Progress came in inches rather than miles. Investigators also reconsidered the route taken after Tammy disappeared. Her body had ultimately been discovered hundreds of miles away in rural Missouri. Transporting a victim over such a distance required time, confidence, and mobility. That behavior suggested someone comfortable driving long distances without attracting suspicion. Again, attention naturally drifted toward occupations involving interstate travel. Commercial drivers. Traveling workers. Individuals whose presence across multiple states would seem perfectly ordinary. But investigators remained careful. The overwhelming majority of truck drivers are law-abiding professionals. The evidence never supported suspicion against an entire profession. Instead, detectives focused on the possibility that one offender may have exploited the anonymity such work could provide. It was an important distinction. Public fear often seeks simple answers. Good investigations resist them. Years passed. America itself changed. Highways became busier. Gas stations modernized. Digital communication transformed daily life. The landscape surrounding Tammy's final journey evolved, yet the essential mystery remained untouched. Who stopped beside that disabled Pontiac? What words were exchanged? What convinced, or forced, Tammy to leave the safety of her vehicle? Those questions haunted investigators every time they reopened the case. For Tammy's family, time did not erase the loss. It merely changed its shape. The immediate panic of not knowing had long since become something quieter, but no less painful. An empty place at family gatherings. Photographs that never gained new additions. The constant awareness that somewhere, another family might unknowingly be sharing dinner with the person responsible. Every anniversary renewed public appeals. Every media interview carried the same message. Someone knows something. Perhaps a coworker once heard an unusual story. Perhaps a family member noticed unexplained behavior after August 1992. Perhaps an old conversation dismissed decades earlier would suddenly make sense in light of modern investigations. Cold cases often depend upon changing loyalties. Relationships end. Secrets become burdens. Consciences grow heavier. People once too frightened to speak eventually decide they no longer wish to protect the truth. Investigators understood that patience could become as valuable as evidence itself. Somewhere beyond the archived files and laboratory reports, beyond fading newspaper clippings and weathered interstate signs, the answer still existed. Not as a theory. Not as speculation. As a fact known by at least one living person. The challenge was finding that person before another year slipped quietly into history, carrying with it one more layer of forgotten memories and one more opportunity for justice to disappear beneath the endless traffic moving west and east along Interstate 80. The calendar continued to turn, but the investigation refused to become just another forgotten file buried inside an evidence warehouse. Every anniversary brought renewed attention. Every newspaper retrospective, every television interview, every public appeal served as another reminder that somewhere, someone had escaped justice. The name Tammy Zawicki had become more than a victim's identity. It had become synonymous with one of the Midwest's most haunting cold cases, a mystery that challenged investigators year after year and exposed just how vulnerable a lone traveler could become on America's highways. For detectives assigned to the case, frustration was becoming as familiar as determination. Unlike television dramas, real investigations rarely move in dramatic breakthroughs. They move in paperwork. Phone calls. Interviews. Laboratory requests. Dead ends. Tiny discoveries that often lead nowhere. Weeks of work can disappear with a single verified alibi. Months of investigation can collapse because one witness remembers the wrong day. Tammy's case became exactly that kind of investigation. 1,000 pieces. No completed picture. Investigators revisited every confirmed sighting, carefully comparing witness statements that had been collected years apart. Human memory changes over time. Details become sharper in some places and blur completely in others. People unconsciously fill missing gaps with assumptions. Detectives knew they could not rely on certainty alone. Instead, they searched for consistency. Again and again, the same image emerged. A white Pontiac. Its hood raised. A young woman stranded beside one of the busiest highways in America. Then, nothing. The silence after those sightings remained almost impossible to explain. If Tammy had accepted assistance voluntarily, why had no one clearly remembered the individual helping her? If she had been forced into another vehicle, why had no passing driver recognized an obvious abduction? The answer, investigators believed, probably lay somewhere between those two extremes. Criminals who successfully abduct strangers rarely create scenes resembling those in movies. There are no prolonged chases. No dramatic shouting. No crowds gathering to intervene. Instead, events unfold quietly. A calm conversation. A reassuring smile. A believable explanation. A victim who still believes the situation can be resolved peacefully. By the time danger becomes obvious, escape may already be impossible. Behavioral specialists examined the circumstances repeatedly. What would Tammy likely have been thinking after her car failed? She was hundreds of miles from home. She needed transportation. She needed mechanical assistance. She needed reassurance that her trip would continue. Whoever approached her first possessed an immediate psychological advantage. Confidence often creates trust. Someone carrying tools. Someone wearing work clothes. Someone speaking calmly about engines and repairs. None of those characteristics would have appeared threatening. In fact, they may have seemed comforting. That possibility continued to influence the investigation. The offender may not have relied primarily on violence. He may have relied on credibility. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science slowly transformed cold case investigations across the United States. Cases once considered impossible suddenly produced new DNA profiles. Decades-old fingerprints found matches through expanding databases. Tiny biological samples that laboratories once considered unusable became valuable evidence under improved testing techniques. Every scientific breakthrough reignited hope. Tammy's evidence was preserved precisely because earlier investigators understood one simple principle. Technology changes. Evidence does not. A hair recovered in 1992 remains the same hair decades later. A fingerprint does not fade inside an evidence envelope. A fiber retains its structure. The question is not whether the evidence changes. The question is whether science eventually becomes capable of hearing what that evidence has been saying all along. Investigators submitted preserved materials for additional examinations whenever new forensic methods became available. Each request carried enormous expectations. Each laboratory report arrived with cautious anticipation. Sometimes results ruled people out. Sometimes they produced information too limited to identify anyone conclusively. Sometimes they simply confirmed what detectives already suspected. No report identified the killer. Still, eliminating possibilities mattered. Every exclusion narrowed the field. Every scientific advance removed another layer of uncertainty. At the same time, detectives expanded their review of individuals who had attracted attention during earlier stages of the investigation. Some names resurfaced repeatedly over the years. They had appeared in witness statements, anonymous tips, or unrelated criminal investigations. None had produced sufficient evidence for prosecution, but none could be ignored completely. Cold case investigators understand the danger of tunnel vision. Focusing too heavily on one suspect can blind an investigation to another. For that reason, every significant lead underwent repeated review. Old interviews were compared against newly available records. Employment histories were reconstructed. Travel patterns were analyzed where possible. Criminal backgrounds received renewed scrutiny. Investigators looked not only at what people had done but where they had been. Could anyone be reliably placed along Tammy's route? Could anyone explain unusual movements during those critical hours? Could anyone account for unexplained absences? Sometimes the answers strengthened suspicion. Other times they dismantled it entirely. Real investigations often require detectives to abandon their favorite theories. Evidence, not instinct, must decide. Another aspect of the case continued troubling investigators. the distance between Tammy's abandoned vehicle and the location where her body was eventually discovered. Transporting a victim hundreds of miles dramatically increases risk. Every additional mile creates more opportunities for witnesses, police encounters, mechanical failures, or simple bad luck. Why would an offender take such a risk? Behavioral analysts proposed several possibilities. Perhaps the killer routinely traveled long interstate routes and considered the distance unremarkable. Perhaps he believed moving the body far from the abduction site would complicate jurisdictional coordination. Perhaps the rural Missouri location held personal significance. Or perhaps it was selected entirely by chance during an ongoing journey. Each explanation remained plausible. None could be proven. The uncertainty extended beyond geography. Investigators also questioned the offender's experience. Was this an individual committing his first violent crime? Or someone already practiced in controlling victims? Certain elements suggested preparation. The apparent ability to approach a stranded motorist without immediately alarming her. The confidence required to leave the area unnoticed. The successful avoidance of identification despite extensive publicity. Those characteristics hinted at someone capable of remaining composed under pressure. Whether that confidence resulted from previous crimes or simply personality remains unknown. As years passed, another investigative challenge emerged. Potential witnesses themselves were disappearing. Not through violence. Through time. People relocated. Telephone numbers changed. Businesses closed. Trucking companies merged or ceased operations. Employees retired. Some witnesses died before investigators had opportunities to re-interview them using modern techniques. Every passing year quietly erased another fragment of history. Detectives worked urgently to preserve whatever remained. Thousands of pages were digitized. Photographs were archived electronically. Interview recordings received new preservation efforts. The goal was simple. Prevent the investigation from losing information simply because time refused to stop. Tammy's family continued demonstrating remarkable resilience. Public appeals never became expressions of revenge. Instead, they consistently emphasized accountability. Someone had taken a young woman's future. Someone had forever altered multiple families. Someone had lived freely while Tammy's loved ones carried unanswered questions for decades. Those questions never truly diminished. They simply evolved. At first, families ask where. Later they ask why. Eventually they ask whether the truth will ever emerge. Law enforcement agencies echoed those appeals, reminding the public that even the smallest detail could matter. An old memory. A forgotten conversation. An unusual remark made years earlier. Cold cases have been solved because someone finally recognized the significance of a detail dismissed decades before. Investigators repeatedly stressed that memories need not be perfect. They simply needed to exist. As the case entered another decade, technological change accelerated. Computers capable of analyzing vast collections of information transformed investigative work. Databases expanded. Agencies shared records more efficiently. Communication between jurisdictions improved dramatically compared with the early 1990s. What once required weeks of telephone calls could sometimes be completed in hours. Yet despite all those improvements, one reality remains stubbornly unchanged. Technology cannot invent evidence that never existed. It cannot force a witness to remember. It cannot identify a killer without sufficient data. Science is powerful, but it still depends upon the traces people leave behind. The mystery surrounding Tammy Sawicki persisted because the offender had left remarkably little behind, or because investigators had not yet recognized which clue truly mattered. Every cold case contains moments investigators revisit endlessly. What if another witness had stopped? What if someone had written down a license plate? What if surveillance cameras had existed along Interstate 80? What if cellular telephones with GPS tracking had been common in 1992? Those questions cannot change history, but they illustrate how differently the investigation might unfold today. Modern travelers carry smartphones capable of recording locations, photographs, and emergency calls within seconds. Vehicles increasingly generate electronic data. Highways are monitored by cameras unimaginable 3 decades ago. Tammy disappeared during a different era. An era when a determined offender could blend into interstate traffic and leave behind little more than unanswered questions. Still, investigators refuse to surrender to history. Because every unsolved homicide carries a possibility. However small, however distant. The possibility that tomorrow's technology, tomorrow's witness, or tomorrow's decision by someone burdened with an old secret may finally illuminate what happened during those final moments beside a disabled Pontiac on Interstate 80, where an ordinary trip home quietly transformed into one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. The longer the case remained unsolved, the more it transformed from an active investigation into something almost mythical among detectives who specialized in cold cases. New investigators arriving at their departments often heard Tammy Sawicki's name long before they ever opened the evidence boxes. Veteran detectives spoke about the investigation with a mixture of admiration and frustration. Admiration because of the relentless effort invested over the years. Frustration because every promising lead seemed to dissolve just before reaching the truth. Yet one principle never changed. Someone had killed Tammy. Someone had transported her body hundreds of miles from where she disappeared. Someone had successfully returned to everyday life while an entire investigative task force continued searching for answers. That reality alone guaranteed the case would never truly be closed. Every few years, renewed public attention generated another wave of information. Newspapers revisited the story. Television documentaries reconstructed Tammy's final journey. Radio programs invited listeners to remember anything unusual from late August 1992. Investigators understood that publicity served a purpose beyond informing the public. It disrupted silence. People who had ignored earlier appeals sometimes found themselves thinking differently years later. Relationships ended. Friendships dissolved. Family loyalties weakened. Someone who had once protected another person might no longer feel compelled to remain silent. Cold cases are often solved not because evidence suddenly appears, but because people eventually decide they no longer wish to carry someone else's secret. Detectives never underestimated the weight of conscience. History had shown that killers sometimes spoke carelessly. An inappropriate joke. A disturbing confession made while intoxicated. An oddly specific comment after a news report. A statement dismissed years earlier because nobody understood its significance. Investigators encouraged the public to think back. Not only about Tammy herself, but about people they knew. Who suddenly became nervous after August 1992? Who unexpectedly changed jobs? Who abruptly sold a vehicle? Who left town without explanation? None of those behaviors proved guilt. But together, they could establish patterns worthy of investigation. Meanwhile, advances in criminal profiling continued refining investigators' understanding of offenders who prey upon strangers. Unlike murders driven by personal relationships, stranger homicides often reveal different behavioral characteristics. The offender generally selects opportunity over identity. Circumstances matter more than the victim herself. Tammy's apparent vulnerability, a disabled vehicle on a busy interstate, fit that model. Behavioral experts believed the offender likely possessed enough confidence to approach strangers without immediately arousing suspicion. Confidence, however, should never be mistaken for intelligence. Many violent offenders succeed not because they are brilliant, but because circumstances favor them. A deserted shoulder. Limited witnesses. An era before widespread surveillance. The absence of immediate communication. Those conditions can create opportunities that disappear as technology evolves. Investigators also continued examining crimes that occurred before and after Tammy's murder, searching for possible connections. Across several states, detectives compared reports involving stranded motorists, female travelers, unexplained disappearances, and bodies recovered near major transportation corridors. The comparisons required extraordinary caution. Similar circumstances do not automatically indicate the same offender. Highways produce recurring patterns simply because millions of people use them every year. Still, similarities could not be ignored. Several investigations appeared to share overlapping characteristics. Most ultimately lacked sufficient evidence to establish direct links. Others remained open questions. The possibility that Tammy's killer may have committed additional crimes has never been conclusively established. Nor has it been ruled out. That uncertainty continues to haunt investigators. If the offender acted more than once, each unsolved case might contain another fragment of the larger picture. Another witness. Another forensic sample. Another mistake eventually capable of exposing the truth. The emergence of increasingly sophisticated DNA technology offered renewed optimism. Throughout the United States, decades-old cold cases began reaching dramatic conclusions. Evidence once considered too limited suddenly produced usable genetic profiles. Unknown offenders were identified years, even decades, after committing violent crimes. Every success story reinforced the same lesson. Never discard evidence. Never assume science has reached its limits. What seems impossible today may become routine tomorrow. Tammy's preserved evidence therefore remained invaluable. Whenever meaningful advances occurred, investigators evaluated whether additional testing could reveal information unavailable during earlier examinations. Some analyses produced incremental improvements. Others eliminated investigative possibilities. Each result mattered. In complex homicide investigations, ruling out innocent individuals is nearly as important as identifying guilty ones. It prevents resources from drifting toward false conclusions. As forensic methods evolved, so did investigative databases. Law enforcement agencies developed stronger systems for sharing information across jurisdictions. Detectives who once relied upon mailed reports and telephone conversations now possess digital access to expanding collections of criminal intelligence. Connections previously hidden by geography became easier to recognize. If a suspect appeared in multiple investigations spanning several states, investigators stood a better chance of discovering that pattern. The challenge remained that Tammy's killer, if never arrested for another qualifying offense, might never appear inside those systems at all. That possibility forced detectives to think beyond conventional investigative methods. Public outreach remained essential. Case summaries circulated widely. Crime conferences highlighted the investigation. Cold case specialists exchanged theories while remaining grounded in verified evidence. One recurring question centered upon timing. Exactly how long did Tammy remain beside her disabled vehicle before disappearing? The answer could significantly influence the investigation. If she waited only briefly, the offender may have encountered her almost immediately after the breakdown. If she remained there for an extended period, numerous unidentified motorists may have interacted with her before the fatal encounter. Unfortunately, the available evidence has never established that timeline with complete certainty. That uncertainty affects nearly every other aspect of the case. How many opportunities existed for witnesses? How many people may have stopped? How many potential suspects unknowingly passed through investigators' field of view without attracting attention? Each unanswered question generated another. Another continuing focus involved the recovery location in rural Missouri. Crime scene investigators carefully documented the area, searching for tire impressions, trace evidence, discarded objects, or environmental clues capable of revealing how the offender selected that location. Remote disposal sites often provide behavioral insight. Some offenders choose familiar areas. Others simply seek isolation. The available evidence has never conclusively established why that specific location was chosen. Whether it reflected local knowledge or random convenience remains uncertain. Investigators resisted speculation unsupported by evidence. Real answers matter more than satisfying theories. As years accumulated, Tammy's case gradually entered criminal justice training discussions. Not because investigators had failed, but because the investigation illustrated the extraordinary complexity of crimes committed across multiple jurisdictions during the early 1990s. The case demonstrated how quickly opportunities vanish after roadside disappearances. It emphasized the importance of preserving physical evidence. It reinforced the necessity of cooperation among local, state, and federal agencies. Most importantly, it reminded investigators that unsolved does not mean forgotten. Young detectives studying cold case methodology frequently encountered Tammy's investigation as an example of persistence. Each generation inherited not only the evidence but also the responsibility. Responsibility to question assumptions. Responsibility to revisit overlooked details. Responsibility to recognize that justice delayed remains preferable to justice abandoned. Tammy's family continued honoring her memory with remarkable dignity. Public statements focused not on sensationalism but on remembrance. Behind every cold case headline stood a daughter, a student, a friend. A young woman whose future ended on what should have been an ordinary drive home. Time had transformed the public's relationship with the case. People who remembered watching the original news reports now shared the story with younger generations unfamiliar with it. New audiences encountered the investigation through documentaries, newspaper retrospectives, and online archives. Fresh eyes examined familiar facts. Sometimes that alone creates opportunity. Investigators have long believed that someone who was unwilling to speak in 1992 might feel differently decades later. Age changes perspective. Fear loses strength. Old promises lose meaning. The burden of silence becomes increasingly difficult to carry. Whether that moment will eventually arrive remains unknown. What investigators do know is that homicide has no expiration date. Evidence preserved carefully can survive generations. Witnesses can emerge unexpectedly. Scientific breakthroughs continue advancing beyond previous expectations. Every one of those possibilities keeps Tammy Zawicki's case alive. Not merely inside filing cabinets or digital databases, but inside the determination of those who continue asking the same question that first echoed across Interstate 80 more than 3 decades ago. Who was the stranger who stopped beside a disabled college student's car? Who recognized an opportunity where everyone else saw only an ordinary roadside breakdown? And who has spent all these years knowing exactly what happened during those missing hours while the rest of America has been left searching for answers that still lie hidden somewhere between memory, evidence, and the long, unbroken ribbon of highway where Tammy Zawicki was last seen alive? The passage of time has a strange effect on an unsolved murder. In the beginning, investigators race against the clock, convinced that the next interview, the next laboratory report, or the next anonymous phone call might finally expose the truth. Years later, the race changes. Time itself becomes both an enemy and an unexpected ally. Witnesses forget faces, but guilt has a habit of lingering. Evidence grows older, but science grows stronger. Files gather dust, yet questions refuse to disappear. For the detectives who inherited Tammy Zawicki's case, that contradiction defined every step forward. They were no longer investigating a recent homicide. They were investigating history. Every document they opened had been written by someone else. Every interview had been conducted decades earlier. Some of the detectives whose handwritten notes filled the case files had long since retired. Others had passed away. The responsibility now belonged to a new generation, officers who had never stood beside Tammy's abandoned Pontiac, never walked the original recovery site when the evidence was fresh, and never experienced the urgency of those first frantic weeks. Instead, they inherited something equally challenging. A mountain of information. Thousands of pages. Hundreds of interviews. Photographs preserved in carefully labeled envelopes. Laboratory reports reflecting the technology of their time. Every detail mattered. Every assumption deserved another look. Cold case investigators often begin with an uncomfortable question. What if the original investigation overlooked something obvious? Not because detectives were careless. Because every investigation is limited by the knowledge, technology, and circumstances of its own era. What appears insignificant in one decade may become critically important in another. With that philosophy guiding their work, investigators revisited witness statements line by line. Some interviews contained tiny inconsistencies. A difference in estimated time. A disagreement over vehicle descriptions. Conflicting recollections about weather conditions. None appeared dramatic. Yet experience had taught detectives that major breakthroughs sometimes emerge from seemingly insignificant contradictions. People often remember the emotional parts of an event while forgetting the factual sequence. Others remember facts accurately but misjudge time. Separating reliable observations from understandable mistakes became one of the investigation's greatest challenges. The team also reconsidered the broader environment surrounding Tammy's disappearance. Interstate 80 in August 1992 looked very different from the highway travelers recognized today. Modern motorists expect surveillance cameras, smartphones, GPS navigation, and electronic payment records. Back then, none of those technologies routinely followed ordinary travelers. A person could drive hundreds of miles using cash, make telephone calls from public pay phones, and leave behind remarkably little evidence of their journey. That reality offered enormous freedom. It also offered dangerous anonymity. Investigators wondered whether the killer had understood that advantage. Was the crime carefully planned? Or had circumstances simply favored someone capable of exploiting an unexpected opportunity? Behavioral analysts continued examining both possibilities. Planning leaves patterns. Opportunity leaves chaos. Tammy's case appeared to contain elements of both. The apparent selection of a vulnerable stranger suggested opportunity. The successful avoidance of identification suggested composure. Whether that composure reflected previous criminal experience remained impossible to determine with certainty. Another important question persisted. Why Tammy? There was nothing indicating she had been specifically targeted before beginning her journey. No verified threats. No evidence of stalking. No confirmed enemies. Everything investigators uncovered suggested she happened to experience mechanical trouble at the worst possible place and the worst possible time. That randomness disturbed both investigators and the public. Random violence creates a unique kind of fear. Personal disputes remain confined to particular relationships. Random attacks challenge everyone's sense of safety. Anyone driving alone can imagine the same scenario. An engine begins overheating. A warning light appears. The vehicle loses power. The shoulder of the highway suddenly becomes the only option. Most people expect assistance. Almost nobody expects evil. That psychological reality explains why Tammy's case continued resonating decades after the crime. It represented more than one family's tragedy. It exposed the vulnerability hidden beneath ordinary routines. Meanwhile, forensic science continued advancing at an extraordinary pace. DNA analysis became increasingly sensitive. Trace evidence once considered too limited for examination could now produce meaningful results under certain circumstances. Investigators carefully reviewed preserved evidence to determine whether additional testing might generate new leads. Each submission to the laboratory represented renewed hope. Every envelope carried the possibility, however small, that modern science might detect what older technology could not. Sometimes the results narrowed possibilities. Sometimes they ruled individuals out. Sometimes they produced information requiring further analysis but stopped short of identifying an offender. The process demanded patience. Science rarely delivers dramatic answers overnight. It advances one method at a time. One improvement. One refinement. One newly developed technique. Across the United States, numerous cold cases reached unexpected conclusions because evidence preserved decades earlier finally yielded usable forensic information. Each solved case inspired investigators working on unsolved homicides. If justice could arrive after 20 years, 30 years, even 40 years, then Tammy's case still possessed hope. Investigators also broadened their understanding of criminal mobility. In 1992, long-haul transportation connected nearly every major region of the country. Commercial vehicles crossed multiple state lines each week according to demanding schedules. Most drivers performed difficult jobs with professionalism and integrity. Yet detectives recognized that any occupation involving constant travel could theoretically provide an offender with opportunities unavailable to someone whose daily movements remained local. This line of inquiry required extraordinary care. Investigators focused on individuals, not professions. They avoided broad conclusions unsupported by evidence. The objective remained simple. Identify one specific person whose movements, behavior, and available evidence aligned with the facts. Nothing more. Nothing less. Public appeals continued emphasizing that distinction. Authorities asked former coworkers, acquaintances, friends, and relatives to think carefully about anyone whose behavior changed around the time of Tammy's disappearance. Did someone suddenly become unusually interested in news coverage? Did someone make disturbing comments about the case? Did someone unexpectedly alter travel routines? No single observation proved anything. Combined with physical evidence, however, seemingly ordinary details could become extremely valuable. Another challenge emerged as investigative techniques evolved. Earlier generations of detectives had documented interviews using handwritten notes, typed reports, and analog recordings. Modern investigators digitized those materials, making comparisons far easier than before. Names appearing across multiple reports became easier to identify. Repeated locations emerged more clearly. Patterns hidden within paper archives gradually revealed themselves through digital analysis. Technology could not solve the case by itself, but it allowed investigators to ask better questions. The case also attracted increasing attention from independent researchers, journalists, and organizations dedicated to unsolved crimes. Their work introduced Tammy's story to audiences too young to remember the original investigation. New publicity created another wave of tips. Most repeated familiar theories. Some introduced genuinely new information requiring verification. Experienced detectives understood that every new lead demanded careful evaluation, regardless of its source. Cold cases cannot afford assumptions. The most unlikely caller occasionally provides the missing piece. At the same time, investigators remained cautious of speculation fueled by public fascination. Unsolved murders naturally generate theories. The internet amplified them dramatically. Some proposed elaborate conspiracies. Others confidently identified suspects without supporting evidence. Law enforcement consistently returned to the same principle. Facts first. Evidence first. Everything else remained possibility rather than proof. That discipline protected the integrity of the investigation. As anniversaries accumulated, Tammy's family continued demonstrating extraordinary resilience. They spoke not only about loss but about memory. They wanted the public to remember who Tammy had been before she became a headline. A college student excited about the future. A daughter expected home. A young woman whose life should have continued far beyond one summer afternoon. Investigators shared that perspective. Victims should never be remembered solely for the violence committed against them. Justice begins with restoring their humanity. The files contained crime scene photographs, forensic reports, timelines, and witness interviews. But behind every page stood a life interrupted. A future erased. Dreams permanently unfinished. That understanding fueled the determination of every detective assigned to the case. Because somewhere beyond those thousands of pages existed one final conversation. One encounter. One decision made by an unknown individual beside a disabled vehicle on Interstate 80. A decision that changed countless lives forever. Decades later, investigators still believed the truth had not vanished. It remained hidden inside memory, preserved within evidence, or carried silently by someone who had never stepped forward. The challenge was no longer whether the truth existed. The challenge was whether time, science, and persistence could reach it before the last unanswered question disappeared along with the generation that had witnessed the events of August 1992. The hope surrounding a cold case rarely arrives with sirens or dramatic courtroom announcements. More often, it returns quietly. A detective notices a forgotten notation in the margin of an interview transcript. A laboratory develops a new forensic technique. A witness who once stayed silent decides that carrying the truth has become more difficult than speaking it. In Tammy Sawicki's case, every one of those possibilities remained alive even as the years stretched into decades. By the early years of the 21st century, the investigation had entered a new era. The original crime scene no longer existed in the form detectives first encountered it. Highway shoulders had been repaired. Businesses near Tammy's route had changed ownership or disappeared altogether. Rest areas had been renovated. Truck stops had expanded or closed. Landscapes evolved without regard for the tragedies they once witnessed. Evidence, however, remained frozen in time. Inside carefully preserved storage boxes rested clothing, photographs, forensic samples, handwritten diagrams, interview notes, and reports documenting every known fact surrounding Tammy's disappearance and murder. Each item represented a question still waiting for an answer. Investigators approached those materials with renewed determination. Not because they expected miracles. Because history had repeatedly demonstrated that impossible cases sometimes become solvable through persistence alone. Across America, long-forgotten murders were beginning to reach unexpected conclusions. Advances in forensic science, improved evidence preservation, and renewed investigative cooperation had produced arrests in cases once considered permanently unsolved. Every announcement carried the same message. Time does not automatically protect a killer. That lesson inspired detectives responsible for Tammy's investigation. They understood that solving a cold case rarely depends upon one spectacular breakthrough. Instead, success often emerges from the careful accumulation of many small developments. An updated laboratory result. A newly available database. A re-examined witness statement. A tip that suddenly fits information unavailable years earlier. Like assembling a puzzle, each additional piece slowly reveals the larger image. Investigators revisited the chronology once again. Tammy left Grinnell College intending to drive home to Illinois before classes resumed. Her vehicle developed mechanical problems along Interstate 80. The Pontiac was later located abandoned. Weeks afterward, her body was discovered in rural Missouri. Those broad facts had never changed. Everything between them remained uncertain. How long did Tammy remain with her disabled car? Who first approached her? Did more than one individual stop? Was there a conversation overheard by someone who never realized its significance? Every unanswered question represented another direction for investigators to explore. Detectives also reconsidered the enormous logistical challenge facing the offender. Transporting a victim across state lines requires confidence. It requires time. It requires the belief that no one will notice unusual behavior. Behavioral specialists examined what those choices might reveal. Did the offender routinely travel long distances? Was he accustomed to spending hours on interstate highways? Did he possess legitimate reasons to cross multiple jurisdictions? Again, investigators avoided conclusions unsupported by evidence. Possibility alone cannot sustain a criminal case. Facts must eventually replace theory. Meanwhile, public awareness of the investigation continued growing through documentaries, newspaper features, and true crime programming. Tammy's smiling photograph appeared before new audiences who had never heard her name. Each broadcast generated another wave of telephone calls. Some callers offered memories buried for years. Others repeated rumors already investigated long ago. Detectives treated every communication seriously. Experience had taught them that valuable information sometimes arrives mixed with misunderstanding. Separating one from the other required patience rather than assumptions. The investigation also benefited from stronger cooperation among agencies. Compared with the early 1990s, communication between local, state, and federal investigators had improved dramatically. Information could be shared more efficiently. Records became easier to compare. Investigators examining unrelated cases could now identify similarities more quickly than ever before. This collaborative approach proved especially important in crimes crossing multiple state boundaries. Tammy's final journey involved Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. Coordinating information across those jurisdictions remained essential. One agency alone could never possess the complete picture. As analytical methods improved, investigators paid closer attention to offender behavior rather than simply physical evidence. Every crime tells two stories. One belongs to the victim. The other belongs to the offender. The victim's story explains what happened. The offender's behavior explains how and why. In Tammy's case, several behavioral observations remained consistent. The offender appeared capable of approaching a vulnerable stranger without immediately creating alarm. He successfully removed her from the roadside without attracting confirmed eyewitness attention. He transported her over a considerable distance. He avoided identification despite extensive publicity. None of those facts revealed his identity. Together, however, they suggested organization, confidence, and familiarity with interstate travel. Whether those characteristics reflected occupational experience, previous criminal conduct, or simple circumstance has never been conclusively established. Investigators also recognized another uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the killer believed the crime would never be solved. In 1992, forensic capabilities differed dramatically from those available decades later. Someone committing a stranger homicide might reasonably assume physical evidence would never identify him. That assumption has proven dangerously wrong in many other investigations. Cold case units across the country have demonstrated that evidence preserved with care can become extraordinarily powerful years later. Every technological advancement reduced the margin of safety once enjoyed by unknown offenders. For Tammy's investigators, that reality strengthened rather than weakened their resolve. They frequently reminded the public that unsolved does not mean inactive. Evidence continued to be evaluated. Tips continued to be investigated. Scientific developments continued to influence investigative strategy. The case remained open because justice remained possible. The emotional dimension of the investigation proved equally significant. For Tammy's family, every anniversary represented another year without certainty. Grief often changes over time. Questions do not. Knowing a loved one was murdered creates profound pain. Not knowing who committed the crime adds another burden entirely. Every family gathering became a reminder of the future that had been stolen. Every birthday marked another milestone Tammy never reached. Behind the investigative terminology victim, evidence, suspect, witness stood ordinary people forced to live with extraordinary loss. Law enforcement never lost sight of that reality. Cold case detectives often describe themselves as temporary custodians. The case does not belong to them. It belongs to the victim. Their responsibility is to carry it forward until answers emerge or every possibility has been exhausted. Tammy's investigation embodied that philosophy. No detective expected recognition. Success would belong to the truth itself. Another area receiving renewed attention involved witness psychology. Many individuals hesitate to contact law enforcement because they believe their memories are too insignificant to matter. Investigators repeatedly challenged that assumption. Someone may remember seeing an unfamiliar vehicle. Someone else may recall an unusual conversation. Another person may remember nothing more than a date, a location, or an unexpected encounter. Individually, such details appear meaningless. Combined, they can transform an investigation. That belief shaped every public appeal. Authorities never asked the public to solve the case. They asked them to remember. Memory often succeeds where certainty fails. One forgotten observation can illuminate another. One recovered recollection can connect evidence separated by decades. The investigation therefore became not only a search for physical proof but also a search through human memory itself. Years continued passing. The nation changed. Technology advanced. Generations grew older. Yet one image remained constant inside every investigative review. A young college student standing beside a disabled white Pontiac on Interstate 80. She believed she was facing an inconvenient mechanical problem. She could not have known she was living the final chapter of her life. Neither could the motorists who drove past. Neither could the families traveling home that afternoon. Somewhere among the endless movement of traffic, an ordinary day quietly transformed into one of America's enduring unsolved homicide investigations. The road kept carrying travelers toward their destinations. Tammy never reached hers. And somewhere, beyond the preserved evidence, beyond decades of interviews and laboratory reports, beyond every public appeal and every renewed investigation, remained a single truth that had survived untouched since August 1992. Someone knew exactly what happened after Tammy's car came to a stop. Someone had lived year after year with knowledge unavailable to investigators, unavailable to her family, unavailable to the public. Whether that knowledge would eventually emerge remained uncertain. But as long as the evidence endured, as long as investigators continued reopening the files, and as long as one unanswered question remained echoing across the highways of the American Midwest, Tammy Zawicki's story would refuse to fade into history. It would remain what it had always been, a promise that even the oldest mysteries deserve the relentless pursuit of truth, no matter how many years have passed. The investigation entered its fourth decade carrying something few criminal cases ever achieve: endurance. Not because detectives had solved every question, but because they had refused to surrender to the absence of answers. Every few years, the files were reopened. Every significant advance in forensic science triggered another review. Every anniversary reminded investigators that the passage of time changes many things, but it does not change the obligation to pursue justice. Cold cases possess a unique kind of tension. Unlike active investigations driven by daily developments, cold cases unfold almost invisibly. Progress may occur without headlines. Months of laboratory work can produce a single new finding. A witness may spend years wrestling with a memory before deciding to contact investigators. Patience becomes an investigative tool. No detective understood that better than those responsible for Tammy Zawicki's case. The evidence had survived. The question was whether the truth had survived with it. As forensic technology continued evolving throughout the 2010s, law enforcement agencies across the United States witnessed an extraordinary transformation. Biological evidence once considered too limited for meaningful examination suddenly became capable of producing investigative leads. Laboratories refined methods for recovering DNA from increasingly smaller samples. Digital imaging improved the examination of aging photographs. Evidence preservation techniques that had seemed merely cautious decades earlier now proved remarkably valuable. For Tammy's investigators, every scientific advancement prompted the same question. Should the evidence be tested again? The answer was almost always yes. Not because previous examinations had failed. Because science had changed. Detectives often describe forensic evidence as silent. It never tells investigators where to look. It simply waits. When technology finally learns the right questions to ask, the evidence answers in ways previously impossible. Boxes sealed years earlier were reopened with extraordinary care. Chain of custody procedures were reviewed meticulously. Every item handled decades before received fresh attention under modern standards. Nothing was assumed. Nothing was dismissed simply because earlier investigators had already examined it. One of the defining characteristics of successful cold case work is intellectual humility. Every generation must accept the possibility that the previous generation lacked tools rather than determination. That distinction matters. The detectives who worked Tammy's case in 1992 were not defeated by indifference. They were constrained by the science available to them. Modern investigators respected that legacy. Their responsibility was not to criticize earlier efforts. Their responsibility was to build upon them. At the same time, analysts continued examining offender behavior through increasingly sophisticated methods. Behavioral science had advanced considerably since the early 1990s. Researchers better understood victim selection, offender mobility, decision-making under stress, and the psychology of stranger violence. Although profiling cannot identify a specific offender, it can help investigators narrow investigative priorities. Tammy's case continued suggesting an offender who recognized opportunity. The disabled vehicle. The isolated shoulder. The appearance of legitimate assistance. Those elements remained central. Yet investigators also considered another possibility. Perhaps the offender had not originally intended murder. Perhaps the initial encounter began differently than detectives first imagined. Criminal investigations frequently reveal situations that escalated unexpectedly. A seemingly routine interaction becomes violent. An attempted theft becomes homicide. An effort to silence a witness creates a far more serious crime. The available evidence has never established exactly how events unfolded after Tammy disappeared from Interstate 80. Because of that uncertainty, investigators remained careful not to treat any single theory as established fact. Evidence, not speculation, would ultimately determine the truth. Another recurring question involved geography. The route between Tammy's abandoned vehicle and the rural Missouri location where her body was discovered covers hundreds of miles. Investigators repeatedly studied maps searching for logical explanations. Did the offender follow a familiar commercial route? Did weather influence travel decisions? Did highway exits, fuel stops, or rest areas play roles that investigators had not yet recognized? Maps covered conference tables once again. Modern software supplemented traditional investigative methods, allowing detectives to visualize movement patterns more efficiently than before. Technology helped organize information. It could not replace human judgment. Every line drawn across the map still represented decisions made by an unknown offender decades earlier. Public cooperation remained equally important. Investigators continued encouraging anyone with information, even information that appeared insignificant, to come forward. That request reflected experience rather than optimism. Some of America's oldest homicide cases have been solved because a witness finally remembered one overlooked detail. A vehicle parked where it should not have been. A conversation repeated years later. An unexplained absence from work. A sudden change in personality. Individually, such observations may appear meaningless. Together, they sometimes reveal patterns invisible to investigators working with physical evidence alone. Tammy's case repeatedly demonstrated another difficult reality. Time changes witnesses. Someone interviewed in 1992 may remember events differently 30 years later. Memory does not function like a video recording. It changes through repetition, emotion, and experience. For that reason, investigators approached renewed interviews carefully. Their objective was not to force certainty. It was to identify consistency. Details repeated independently across decades often deserved closer attention. Contradictions required equal scrutiny. Neither automatically established truth. Both guided further investigation. Meanwhile, advances in information sharing transformed cooperation among law enforcement agencies. Databases expanded. Analytical software improved. Jurisdictions exchanged information more rapidly than investigators in 1992 could have imagined. Cases once isolated by geography now became easier to compare. If another investigation contained overlapping characteristics, detectives stood a greater chance of recognizing the connection. Still, investigators remained disciplined. Similarity is not proof. Two crimes may resemble one another while involving entirely different offenders. Professional investigators understand the danger of confirmation bias. Seeing connections because they are desired can be as harmful as overlooking genuine ones. That caution remained essential throughout Tammy's investigation. The emotional weight of the case never diminished. Each public appeal reminded viewers that Tammy had been only 21 years old. She had not disappeared while engaging in dangerous activities. She had not intentionally entered a criminal environment. She had simply been driving home before the beginning of another college semester. That ordinary circumstance continued making the case profoundly unsettling. Millions of people undertake similar journeys every year. Parents still remind their children to call if their car breaks down. Friends still offer roadside assistance. Travelers still trust strangers more often than they realize. Tammy's story became a permanent reminder that routine moments can change without warning. Investigators frequently reflected upon another aspect of the case. Luck. Every criminal investigation contains elements beyond anyone's control. A witness glances away at the wrong moment. Rain destroys evidence. A surveillance camera points in another direction. A receipt is discarded. An engine noise drowns out a cry for help. Conversely, cases are sometimes solved because of astonishing coincidence. Someone notices a license plate. A forgotten photograph captures a suspect. A routine traffic stop uncovers decisive evidence. Detectives cannot rely upon luck. They prepare for the moment luck finally appears. That philosophy guided every review of Tammy's case. Nothing should remain unexamined. Nothing should remain unquestioned. As the years passed, many original participants in the investigation watched younger detectives assume responsibility. Knowledge transferred from one generation to another. Not simply through reports. Through conversations. Experienced investigators explained why certain theories had been pursued. Why others had been abandoned. Which witnesses inspired confidence. Which required caution. Cold case investigations depend as much upon institutional memory as physical evidence. Without careful preservation, valuable understanding disappears when experienced investigators retire. Tammy's case avoided that fate because each generation recognized its importance. It had become more than an unsolved homicide. It had become a commitment. A commitment to persistence. A commitment to evidence. A commitment to resisting the temptation to declare defeat simply because years had passed. Somewhere beyond every laboratory report, every witness statement, every map covered with handwritten notes, one unavoidable fact continued waiting. The person responsible had once stood close enough to Tammy to change the course of her life forever. That individual had seen her face. Had heard her voice. Had made choices that no passage of time could erase. Whether those choices would eventually be reconstructed in a courtroom remained unknown. But investigators believed something equally important. Truth does not become less true because it remains hidden. It waits. Sometimes for months. Sometimes for decades. Sometimes for generations. And as long as Tammy Zawicki's evidence remained preserved, as long as detectives continued reopening the files with fresh eyes, and as long as someone, somewhere, still carried knowledge they had never shared, the possibility of finally uncovering what happened on that August journey home would remain alive, quietly, patiently, and relentlessly, beneath the endless stream of traffic that continued flowing along Interstate 80, indifferent to the mystery that had unfolded there but never powerful enough to bury it forever. The story of Tammy Zawicki survived because it contains something every unresolved investigation fears and every cold case detective understands, the possibility that the final answer was always closer than anyone realized. Not hidden behind impossible circumstances. Not buried beneath a mystery too complex to solve. But trapped inside one overlooked detail, one forgotten memory, one person who had remained silent for reasons investigators could only imagine. For decades, that possibility kept the investigation alive. The world around the case continued changing. The young detectives who first walked through evidence rooms in the 1990s became veterans. Some retired. Some moved into leadership positions. New investigators entered departments carrying smartphones, advanced databases, and forensic tools that would have seemed impossible when Tammy disappeared. Yet the core mystery remained exactly the same. What happened during those final moments beside Interstate 80? The answer had not changed. Only the methods used to find it had. Cold case investigators often describe their work as a conversation with the past. They examine evidence created decades earlier and attempt to understand decisions made by people who may no longer be available to explain them. Every piece of evidence carries a story. A fingerprint represents a touch. A fiber represents a connection. A photograph represents a moment frozen forever. A witness statement represents a memory captured before time could alter it. The challenge is discovering which pieces are meaningful and which are simply fragments of coincidence. Tammy's case contained both. Over the years, investigators received countless tips. Some came from people genuinely trying to help. Some came from individuals convinced they possessed information that later proved inaccurate. Some came from people seeking attention. Each required careful evaluation. Detectives understood that frustration could never replace discipline. A desperate desire for answers could not justify accepting weak evidence. The wrong suspect could destroy a family's hope and allow the real offender to remain free. For that reason, investigators repeatedly returned to the facts. Tammy was a college student. She was traveling home. Her car suffered mechanical problems. She was seen near her disabled vehicle. She disappeared. Her remains were later found. Everything beyond those facts required proof. That commitment to evidence became especially important as public interest intensified through online discussions and true crime communities. The internet brought Tammy's story to millions of people who had never heard of the case during the original investigation. New audiences studied timelines. They analyzed photographs. They discussed possible suspects. They searched for connections. Public attention could be valuable. It could also create challenges. Online theories spread quickly, often moving faster than verified information. A name mentioned repeatedly could begin appearing guilty simply because people repeated it enough times. Investigators understood that suspicion and evidence are not the same thing. A theory may sound convincing. A theory may even be correct. But only evidence can transform possibility into justice. That principle guided every official review. Among the most persistent questions surrounding the case was whether Tammy's killer had any connection to her before that day. Investigators examined her personal life carefully. Friends. Classmates. Neighbors. Family relationships. Nothing revealed a clear personal motive. No confirmed enemy emerged. No known conflict explained why someone would target her. That absence pushed investigators back toward the possibility of a stranger encounter. A crime of opportunity. The idea was both simple and terrifying. Tammy may not have been chosen because of who she was. She may have been chosen because of where she was. A vulnerable person. A vulnerable moment. A vulnerable location. That possibility changed the nature of the investigation. Instead of looking only at people connected to Tammy, investigators had to consider countless strangers who crossed her path. The search area expanded from a community to an entire transportation network. The highway became both the beginning and the obstacle. Interstate 80 connected thousands of lives every day. Commercial shipments. Family vacations. Business trips. Student travel. The same feature that made the highway useful for ordinary people also made it useful for someone trying to disappear. An offender could enter the flow of traffic and become just another vehicle among thousands. That reality remained one of the greatest challenges. The killer may not have needed to hide. He may have only needed to continue moving. Investigators also continued examining whether Tammy's case could be connected to other crimes. The possibility of a serial offender always exists in investigations involving random stranger attacks. Detectives reviewed missing person cases and unsolved homicides involving similar circumstances. They compared locations, victim profiles, methods, timelines. The process was painstaking. Most comparisons ended without a connection. But eliminating possibilities was still progress. Every unrelated case removed another path from consideration. Every confirmed similarity created a new direction. Over time, investigators developed a deeper understanding of the type of person they were searching for. Not an exact profile. Not a guaranteed description. But a collection of behavioral characteristics. Someone comfortable approaching strangers. Someone capable of maintaining control during a high-risk encounter. Someone able to continue functioning afterward. That final point often troubled investigators the most. Many offenders experience fear after committing serious crimes. They make mistakes. They reveal information. They behave differently. But some manage to separate their criminal actions from their ordinary lives. They go to work. They attend family events. They speak with neighbors. They appear completely normal. That possibility created one of the most unsettling aspects of Tammy's case. The person responsible may have spent decades living among others without anyone knowing what he had done. However, investigators also knew that time creates pressure. People age. Relationships change. Secrets become heavier. A person who once remained silent may eventually decide that protecting someone else is no longer worth the burden. This has happened repeatedly in cold case investigations across the country. A family member comes forward. A former friend contacts police. A person reveals information after years of uncertainty. The truth sometimes emerges not because new evidence appears, but because someone finally chooses to speak. That possibility remains central to every public message about Tammy's case. Investigators did not believe the answer had disappeared. They believed someone knew. Perhaps someone had always known. Perhaps someone only knew a small piece. A conversation. A vehicle. A name. A location. Small pieces can become powerful when placed together. The investigation continued, benefiting from the dedication of detectives who refused to let Tammy become just another unsolved statistic. Behind every cold case file is a temptation. The temptation to accept that too much time has passed. The temptation to believe that memories have faded beyond usefulness. The temptation to move resources toward newer cases. But families do not experience time that way. For them, the day of the crime remains permanently present. The unanswered questions remain fresh. The absence remains impossible to ignore. Tammy's family continued carrying that reality. They continued remembering her as she was before the tragedy. Not as a photograph in a news report. Not simply as the subject of a murder investigation. but as a young woman with plans, relationships, and a future that should have continued. That distinction mattered. Because solving a cold case is not only about identifying an offender. It is about restoring truth to a story that was interrupted. It is about giving families the answers they deserve. It is about replacing decades of uncertainty with facts. As investigators continued reviewing the case, one possibility remained impossible to dismiss. The person responsible may have believed the years would protect him. He may have believed memories would disappear. He may have believed evidence would become meaningless. But history has repeatedly proven otherwise. Time can hide crimes. Time can also expose them. New technology. New investigators. New witnesses. New opportunities. Any of them could change everything. Because somewhere, beneath decades of unanswered questions, the essential facts of Tammy Sawicki's final journey still existed. The highway had moved on. The world had moved on. Entire generations had grown up knowing only the name attached to an unsolved case. But the truth itself had not moved. It remained exactly where it had always been. Waiting. And for the investigators who continued searching, the mission remained unchanged. Find the person who took Tammy's life. Understand what happened during those missing hours. And finally bring an ending to a story that began with a simple drive home but became one of America's most enduring reminders that some mysteries may remain silent for decades before the truth finally finds its way back into the light. The years following Tammy Sawicki's murder carried a painful contradiction. On one hand, the case represented everything that makes a cold investigation difficult: an unknown offender, limited eyewitness information, a crime spanning multiple jurisdictions, and decades of changing circumstances. On the other hand, the case also represented something investigators had learned repeatedly throughout history. Time does not always protect the guilty. Sometimes, time creates the conditions for the truth to emerge. A witness who was once afraid may become willing to speak. A relationship that once prevented cooperation may end. A new technology may uncover evidence hidden for decades. A person who believed they had escaped forever may suddenly discover that the past has returned. For Tammy Sawicki's family and the investigators who continued pursuing answers, that possibility remained the reason the case stayed alive. The investigation was never simply about finding a suspect. It was about reconstructing a moment in time. A moment when a young woman traveling home from college disappeared from an ordinary highway. A moment when a routine mechanical problem became the beginning of an unimaginable tragedy. A moment witnessed by strangers who did not know they were watching the final chapter of Tammy's life. Cold case detectives often say that the hardest part of solving an old investigation is understanding what cannot be changed. The scene is gone. The people involved have moved on. The original emotions surrounding the event have faded. But the evidence remains. And evidence has no memory. It does not forget. It does not become uncertain. It waits for investigators to discover what it has been holding all along. That belief drove continued examination of Tammy's case. Every new generation of detectives approached the evidence with a different perspective. They brought different experiences, different training, different questions. Sometimes, the most valuable contribution a new investigator can make is simply looking at an old case without being attached to previous assumptions. A theory accepted for years may suddenly appear incomplete. A detail dismissed decades earlier may demand attention. A witness statement that seemed ordinary may take on new meaning when compared with information unavailable during the original investigation. That process of re-examination became essential. The investigators understood that solving a decades-old murder required both respect for the past and a willingness to challenge it. They reviewed timelines repeatedly. They analyzed travel routes. They examined known movements. They studied how an offender could have carried out the crime while avoiding detection. One question remained especially difficult. How could someone abduct a young woman from a major interstate without creating a clear public memory of the event? The answer may lie in how ordinary the situation appeared. A stranded vehicle does not immediately signal danger. A person offering help does not immediately appear threatening. A conversation beside a highway shoulder can look exactly like thousands of similar interactions happening every day. That normal appearance may have been the offender's greatest advantage. Criminals often rely on the fact that people do not expect violence during ordinary moments. A person changing a tire. Someone asking for directions. A driver offering assistance. The world depends on small acts of trust. Most of the time, that trust is justified. The tragedy of Tammy Zawicki's case is that someone may have exploited it. As investigators continued their work, they also studied the possibility that the offender had left the area quickly after the crime. The distance involved created challenges but also potential clues. Long-distance movement requires decisions. Routes must be chosen. Stops must be made. Vehicles require fuel. People interact with others even when attempting to remain unnoticed. Every journey creates opportunities for evidence. A receipt. A witness. A camera image. A conversation. A mistake. Investigators searched for the moment when an unknown offender may have become visible. Perhaps not during the crime itself. Perhaps afterward. Because many crimes are solved not by discovering what the offender did perfectly, but by discovering the one thing they did imperfectly. No person can control every detail forever. The passage of time sometimes reveals those imperfections. Meanwhile, public interest in Tammy's case continued to grow. A new generation encountered her story through online archives, documentaries, and crime investigations. People who had been children when Tammy disappeared became adults capable of providing information. Someone who remembered the case from childhood might later realize that a family member, coworker, or acquaintance had behaved strangely at the time. Someone who once dismissed a detail might suddenly understand its importance. This is one of the most powerful forces in cold case investigations. Perspective changes. The same memory can mean something completely different years later. A conversation that seemed harmless in 1992 may appear disturbing after learning new facts. A person's behavior that once seemed unusual may become significant after investigators reveal additional context. The challenge is reaching those memories before they disappear completely. As decades passed, investigators also confronted the reality that some answers may only come through someone who has never spoken before. The person responsible may have told no one. Or perhaps only one person knows. A friend. A relative. A former partner. Someone who carried suspicion quietly but never believed they had enough information. Law enforcement agencies repeatedly emphasize that witnesses do not need to solve the case themselves. They do not need to know every detail. They do not need certainty. Sometimes, one piece of information is enough to reopen a path that investigators thought had closed forever. The smallest detail can become the beginning of the end. A name. A location. A memory. A photograph. A conversation. That possibility remained the foundation of continued public appeals. The investigation was not waiting for a confession. It was waiting for information. Information that could be tested. Information that could be connected to evidence. Information that could finally transform decades of uncertainty into a clear narrative. For Tammy's loved ones, the search was about more than punishment. It was about understanding. For decades, they had lived with unanswered questions. Where exactly did everything change? What did Tammy experience during those final moments? Who was responsible? Why did it happen? No family should have to carry those questions forever. Yet many families across America share the same painful reality. A loved one becomes a case number. A photograph becomes evidence. A birthday becomes an anniversary of what was lost. Cold case investigators understand that every unresolved homicide represents two unfinished stories. The story of what happened, and the story of the justice that has not yet arrived. Tammy's case remained unfinished because the second story had not reached its final chapter. But investigators continued believing the first story was still recoverable. The truth had not vanished. It had simply remained hidden. The person responsible had left the crime scene behind, but he could not erase the past. He could not erase the evidence. He could not erase the memories of those who loved Tammy. And he could not erase the determination of investigators who continued searching decades after that August afternoon. Because every cold case carries one undeniable reality. The longer a mystery survives, the more people begin to believe it may never be solved. But history has repeatedly shown that the impossible is often only impossible until the right evidence appears. Until the right person speaks. Until the right investigator asks the right question. And somewhere within the unanswered pages of Tammy's Wiki's case file, one final question remained waiting. Not whether the truth existed, but whether the world would finally uncover it.